we increase emotional maturity? It's interesting, as I've had this conversation for 20 years working with senior leadership teams, you go and you start talking about this concept of emotional maturity, and you get these looks, and you get these statements like, oh, really? We got to talk about this touchy-feely crap? Or do we really need to develop these things about humanity, so to speak? I'm too busy working, all kinds of things. And the one I really like the best is a leader that was sitting there one day, and I said, today we're going to learn about this emotional intelligence thing. And I got this rolls to the back of the eyelids. And just his eyes were just like, right, here we go again. That's kind of the way that a lot of people, a lot of leaders feel about this concept of emotional maturity and emotional intelligence. So today we're going to challenge that. We're going to challenge that in introducing you to this concept of how the world has changed, why it's changed, and what do you need to do about it so that you can be more effective as a leader in understanding this concept of emotional maturity. So today the world has shifted. If you think about it, there's this concept of leadership of the 20th century. We now are into the 21st century, and there's a requirement today that people want at least two things from their leaders, and they won't settle for anything less. They want a leader that's both smart and a leader that's human. We're going to talk about that challenge for each of us today, that how does that come about? Because if I talk about leadership in the 20th century now, let's see what that looked like. Let's talk about what that looked like, and then compare that to leadership in the 21st century. And how is it different, and what do you need to do about that? Understanding this idea or concept of emotional intelligence in today's world is no longer a soft skill. That was leadership of the 20th century. Today, it's actually a hard skill. If you don't know how to do it, if you don't know how to be emotionally intelligent and have emotional maturity, then you're failing as a leader. So as we talk about this today, it's a critical competency that you and I both need to learn what it is and how we go about doing it. So to do that, let's talk about leadership in the 20th century and what was that like? So imagine, if we're talking about leadership in the 20th century, imagine if you have ever seen one of those races where those boats, those big long boats, I think it's called sculling, and where the big long boat is there, the people are rowing, and there's somebody sitting at the back of the boat, they've got the bullhorn and they're yelling stroke, and so this whole boat is moving through the water. So there's some key elements to that I want to point out, which really address this concept of what leadership was like in the 20th century. First off, the only person that can see where they're going is the coxswain, the person that sits at the back of the boat. No one else gets to see where they're going. Everyone else is critical in the success though, but they have to operate as a team collectively to the orders of the person sitting at the back of the boat. That's the first characteristic. Second characteristic is, if you watch any of those races, the water on the lakes that there is just absolutely glass and it's absolutely smooth, very little resistance. Then those boats just skim across the water to the cadence and to the call of the leader to their final destination. So that's an analogy of what leadership was like in the 20th century. Leaders were very, very controlling. Leaders told people what they needed to do. People were more like objects to accomplish the goals. It was kind of the industrial revolution, the mindset of factories and those kinds of things. And that leadership worked. It wasn't that it was a bad style leadership, but it was the leadership at that time, and it worked for that time. Now, I'd like to compare and contrast that to leadership in the 21st century. Imagine yourself on a whitewater raft in a level 5 river. Now, I've never been on whitewater rafting, and I don't know, but as people have explained it to me, and it's something like this. I've got this whole raft of humans sitting in this boat, and they're all facing forward. They all see what's coming at them, and they all are engaged in what's happening. There is a leader that sits at the back that has a little bit of influence once they're on the river, but once they're on the river, it really is a full-blown team effort. The level of trust and confidence that people need to have in each other is really, really high. The level of engagement that each person participates in is really, really high. And oh, by the way, the reason why the level of trust has to be high is because if the individual in the front right corner comes and sees what's coming up, that no one else sees, they have to respond in that moment or the whole boat goes down. So now people are making decisions on the moment, making decisions based off of what their interpretation of what the team needs at that moment. A leader is giving direction, but the leader is not directing this boat. There's no individual. The success of that whitewater rafting trip is in the hands of all the people on that boat. That's what it's like today in our organizations. We have humans that all need to be engaged. They all need to be involved, and they want to be involved. And so that's why today people are wanting these two things from their leaders. It's not enough just to be smart. That was a leader of the 20th century. Today they need a leader that's both smart and human and builds a cohesive team that is fully engaged in the direction and the results that they're going after. So where do you start? From an emotional intelligence perspective and really learning to gain this emotional maturity, you need to understand what emotional intelligence is. And it's the simplest form, emotional intelligence is found into 6 different categories. There's self-awareness, self-management, and self-motivation. And as a leader, I need to understand what those 3 are. I need to understand what makes up those 3 things. And I need to understand the competencies associated to those so I can evaluate myself against those competencies and really come to terms with who I am as a human, as a leader, and as an individual. Once I truly understand that, I can move over into the professional arena, which we have additional competencies. Those competencies are centered around social awareness, organizational management, and organizational motivation. In other words, there are all kinds of emotional intelligence competencies that can help me be more effective as a leader in an organization, whether that organization's in my home or family or my organization's in actually the workplace. Either way, I need to understand where I am in terms of those 6 competency areas. We would like to offer you the opportunity to take that assessment and find out where you are in those 6 competency areas so that you can begin your journey. So click below on the assessment link below and take that free emotional intelligence assessment. So now that we know what those 6 are, here's what I'm going to tell you. You need to start on the personal competencies first and start seeing how those personal competencies are having an impact on your emotional maturity. Give you an example. I made the mistake years ago of focusing on the professional competencies first. And in fact, I'd focused on them so well that I really thought that I was doing so good. This one day, this master sergeant that worked for me in my Air Force career walked in my office and he said, "Can I talk to you?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." And he sat down there and he started to just tear me up one side and down the other. What a terrible leader I was, what a terrible boss I was, how I didn't understand him, all kinds of things. And I sat there and I listened, I understood, I apologized. And at the end of that, we actually went away with a really good experience that we had together. He was able to talk and communicate. I was able to talk and communicate. And he walked out of there. And when he walked out, I literally remember sitting back in my chair going, I did it. I've arrived. I'm emotionally mature. I just had an amazing conversation. I was so excited about it. I ran home that day. And the very first thing I told my wife was this: "You will not believe what happened at work today." This guy came in, told her the whole story, and as I'm telling the story, she's just getting like more withdrawn, and you could tell she's getting a little more angry in her face. And pretty soon I just stopped. I'm like, "What in the world is going on?" And she said, "You know, in 20 years of marriage, you have never talked about the problems that we've had or situations we've had in our marriage like you've talked about that guy at work." In that moment, I realized I had done it backwards. I had focused on the professional and ignored the personal. So my challenge and my learning to you is, if you're going to start down this emotional intelligence journey, work on the personal competencies first. Every one of those will flow right over into your professional life. We're going to continue to put out videos like this, and we'd like you to subscribe to our channel so that you can have access to our videos that are going to talk about emotional maturity, self-awareness and emotional intelligence, and videos that have a focus on change in human behavior. Speaking of humans, we are so excited to invite you to join us on our mission of putting the human back into humanity.